Ember awoke to a distant roar, like a great wind. Her dreams, usually warm and bright, had taken on the chill of ice and azure. Rhyme's dreams were restless, filled with dancing fires and a bright, almost blinding light. He dreamed of a great wind, a roaring in the air like some great beast, and the faint smell of sulfur jolting him awake. He was the last in a long line of heroes, the lone defender of the castle in the heart of this kingdom of ice. Rhyme lowered the drawbridge of his castle. As for what it guarded against, he realized he had no idea. As she emerged from the great oak that was her home, she noticed the once great trees of the forest were shattered, broken. It was as if a great storm had blown through, splintering all in its path, the roar that had awoken her. She ventured on, her curiosity growing as she climbed through the tree hollows. There was a growing chill in the air, and the branches stirred in the wind. The storm may have passed, but she knew another was on the way. The permafrost was melting. Rhyme felt a gust of warm wind and wondered if it had brought the wisp beside him. The winds had melted the ice bridges, causing new drops and chasms. But Rhyme could still use the cold to his advantage. He ventured on to the edge of his kingdom. There, he hoped to find answers. The great fire that gave life to her land was dying. Fissures had cracked open tunnels in the cliffs, and great jets of sulfur erupted from the ground. Yet she knew she could use these to her advantage. Rhyme hoped he still had time. He passed the gates of his kingdom and found new tunnels revealed by the melting of the ice. The glistening water of the cave ran down the walls like tears, as if weeping at the melting of his world. Both stepped on the bridge together, matching each other's steps. Ember met Rhyme. A shimmering barrier separated them. On either side of this barrier, each carried their world with them. Neither knew what world they had come to, yet clearly, someone had been here long ago. As they rode across the sky, the two caught sight of a great castle in the distance. And over it, a dark shape soared into the air and was gone. Perhaps there at the castle, they would find answers to what threatened their worlds. Buoyed by Ember's warmth, they rose and ascended when Rhyme's chill fell upon them. Of who had made these tunnels, there was no sign. Only by working together were they able to move forward. The wreckage of great mechanisms, wheels, and pulleys lay along the path. More structures lay ahead, forgotten in the overgrowth. Yet the road had been built with purpose in mind. They came upon a mine and saw what the mechanisms were for. The walls glittered, flecks in the rock shining like stars. It reminded them of the barrier between them, and wondered if there was a connection. Great power lay in the veins of rock, and someone had sought to claim it, and here they had failed. No matter whether touched by cold or warmth, they noticed the ore held its color. Finally, they emerged from the mine, and across the bridge ahead of them lay the great castle they had seen from the gondola. And so, side by side, but with a chasm between them, Ember and Rhyme came to the castle gate and opened it together. The castle, majestic from a distance, had fallen into ruin. Its halls empty. Of the ruler, there was no sign. Ash blackened the stones from a fire long ago. A great door, inscribed on its surface, a golden sheaf of wheat. As the scarf was taken, the door became brighter. Whoever had once held these scarves, the doors had opened for them. Another world opened up before them. Fields of promise stretching as far as the eye could see. But the fields lay untended, the farmers gone. The faded black scarf seemed a hint of royalty, and if it was like the first, it might open doors ahead. Sulfur split the ground here, fissures in the rock. The fissures seemed to be recent, angry, but Rhyme was able to calm it for a time. Working together, Ember moved up and over as Rhyme froze the steam from the vents so she could pass. They worked well together. Evidence of the world's past inhabitants was all around them. Mechanisms meant to harness the wind now lay exposed to it. Yet Ember and Rhyme did not dwell upon it. This barrier was nothing compared to what separated them. The sulfur vents ran hotter and fiercer beneath the surface. Rhyme felt the heat carry him up. He felt elated, and for the first time in a long time, happy. Ember, for her part, was amazed at how Rhyme's presence quelled the vents so she could pass, and she was grateful. The intricacy of the mining platforms was awe-inspiring. Someone had obsessed over their construction, every moving part. They made it a game, each seeing the machinery as traps left by some jealous king hoarding his scarves, but not knowing the truth of it. Rhyme's spirit rose as he harnessed the cold to reach new heights. Ember, seeing his face, echoed his smile. A great cliff rose up before them. It looked as if they could climb the exterior. Perhaps they could use it to scout the horizon. For all the heights they reached, it always seemed one must fall. It became a dance between them. Atop the mountain, another mechanism. A gate built into the side of the mountain. Balancing the lantern's power came easily, each sharing the burden. Rhyme noticed the work lanterns reacted to cold and warmth, yet the world was only a single temperature. As they moved the great platforms, they felt themselves become closer. The two had started to forget a time when they were apart, a time when they were alone. The excavation seemed particularly deep here, as if this was one of the first places the mining had occurred. The mining pit reminded them again of the ore, both the promise of its secret and the hope it could bring them together. They came to a foundry, which looked intact. As they crushed the ore, they both felt a powerful, dizzying rush come over them. The rush drove them onwards, and their spirits soared. They felt like they could do anything together. A great dredging machine looked built to sift ore from the bottom of the lake. Whoever had built these machines had sought the ore everywhere. Ember and Rhyme matched each other's pace easily. Uncertain before, hesitation had fallen away to the presence of one complementing the other. The shifting ice and bright warmth made everything possible. Rhyme became fascinated by the water that echoed in the cave. He was used to the icicles of his home. He had never seen water fall in such a way before. Rhyme held both the platform and the rope in place, and the scarf was within Ember's reach. The rush of the ore had faded. They both missed the sensation, but found comfort in the other's presence. The machines took on curious combinations, woven around heat and ice. Ember wondered if the architect had tried to make flames of his own to power his devices. Rhyme could not tell Ember, but each scarf carried a chill colder than ice. The machine seemed to be a rain catcher, to catch ore from the sky itself. With Ember beside him, Rhyme thought, nothing seemed impossible. By balancing their worlds just right, Rhyme took to the air, and even more than before, he welcomed the feeling of flight Ember gifted him. They felt a rumble in the earth, like the breathing of some great beast. The rumbling grew as they came to a halt. Compared to the sunlit world they had left, the castle seemed even darker and emptier than before. Trees and brush filled the interior, the outside world creeping in slowly. The sanctum looked as if a great force had broken through from above. A pillar had toppled over, but looked as if it might be moved. The two halves of this door seemed sealed together. No symbol lay on its surface, and it had a terrible sense of finality about it. On this door was inscribed a great tree with a thick crown of branches. The scarves had opened the door bedecked with stars. Beyond was a welcoming world. Nature surrounded them. Towering trees rose high into the air. The world was filled with life. A pair of staffs, glowing with the same star-like shine as the ore. They had been left before the gate as if keys for two. Another scarf, tattered shred of ancient royalty, hung from the branches, as if carried there from far away by the wind, out of reach. The tree had been hollowed out, torn through, by something with great claws, long ago. And beyond, a sunlit grotto in the hollow of a great fallen tree. The sun seemed to pierce the forest canopy in so few places. Despite the brightness of Rhyme's world and the heat of Ember's, it was difficult to see the sky above. Only the path was revealed. The bridge between them seemed to grow stronger, brighter with every victory, echoing their feelings. The trees rose like ladders before them, and through them, tunnels and caves, as if something had burned through them. Despite the wonders of the forest, Ember and Rhyme's eyes more often fell on each other. Where the two halves of the tree touched, the branches were like fingers intertwined. The forest bore more marks of chisel and saw, and the path seemed to zig and zag up and under. Another scarf. Rhyme smiled, and Ember, she felt intoxicated with every victory. Together, nothing seemed out of reach, except each other. With the support of the other, not even the sky seemed out of reach. Quenching the steam vent near the scarf reminded them both briefly of the push and pull of their worlds, but their thoughts of home were quickly forgotten in the presence of the other. Ember took a brief dive for the scarf, and Rhyme smiled, echoing her happiness. They climbed ever higher, the tree's height seeming boundless. The forest and the bridge between them always provided a way. A towering wooden structure emerged from the forest. It felt out of place in the forest around them. A structure of ambition, of desire, as if it had been built because the world below had not been enough. As the great observatory opened, they glimpsed a wonder, a shooting star. It seemed to promise a future together. Anything seemed possible. They left the observatory gate and entered the forest, the star blazing in their memories, the same color as the ore. They felt invigorated, eager to press on. The forest, in its quiet balance, no longer seemed enough for them. The dark scarf was a sharp contrast to the star they had seen in the sky. One was dead, the other full of light and life. The great root network revealed itself more and more. The great bellows that vented the heat had gone still and cold. Tension hung in the air, yet in the hollows of the cavern, the crossing roots were a bridge of their own, not an obstacle. They wondered again if perhaps the ore and the staffs could not simply shape the barrier between them, but remove it entirely. What could they accomplish then? The branches bent curiously here, forming a loop, with one end pointing back the way they had come. every scar, the hope of a new world where they could be together grew. The ore had been mined from the rock here, though more primitive, as if by hand. They were thankful for the bridge they shared. It was theirs, and no one could take that from them. Fields of sunlit grass. Even with the touch of cold and embrace of the sun, the vista was beautiful. All the more because they shared it as one. A house of heat and stone, what might have been a kiln, shot fire into the sky from jets sunk deep in the earth. They left the strange house behind, wondering if the staffs had been made there. It seemed as if the structure had been meant as some great cage, now broken open. Balancing the bridge, they retrieved the scarf from the home's nook. It became easier with each attempt, and the joy at their shared success grew. They left the strange house behind. Rhyme wondered if it might have been a craftsman's shop. Ember wondered the same, and wondered if the staffs were created there, and were pulling the two along, showing Rhyme and Ember their history. Ember had come to believe she and Rhyme could succeed at all things. The tunnels went deep indeed, but the miners seemed to have been balanced, wanting not to collapse the ground above, but supporting it instead. Old cables disused, the mining forgotten. The platforms looked as if they could move, but hadn't in some time. This was what the forest had been carved up for, countless mines like this one. They both thought it could never happen to their worlds, yet they still held on to the staffs, taking comfort in the power provided by the ore. More vents pierced the chamber, the jets nearly touching. They felt the power from the staffs, the urge to summon the bridge once more. They ventured on, ever further. The mechanisms cast strange shadows in the caves. They thought about how beautiful the world would have been, untouched by such things. A processional hall, the candles unlit. Ahead was a meditation pool, still and quiet. Water flowed from somewhere ahead. It passed easily between the bars, as if defying the prison. This waterlogged door was ringed by moss, which had spread from the door into the surrounding stone. Another world lay before them, beautiful but muted, as if something was just beyond view. On the horizon, they caught sight of a sorcerer's tower, one of many ruins that dotted the landscape. This had been a kingdom ruled by magic. A shrine. At the top was a cloak of thick, dark fabric, flecks of shimmering ore woven into the hem in chain-like patterns. The road fell away to marsh, and the air grew thick. Mushrooms and strange life abounded. Was the mechanism a water gate? An aqueduct, perhaps? Rhyme was puzzled by the idea, though Ember knew of it from her world, where the water flowed free, unchecked. For all the cloak's weight, Rhyme was amazed at how the world changed in Ember's light. Familiar mechanisms lay in the ruins and overgrowth, works of the absent king. He had worked with the sorcerers of this world. They thought of the other's world for the first time, so unlike their own. The worlds were so different, apart from each other. If the worlds were joined and one touched the other, what would happen? Rhyme thought of life without the crystal beauty of ice. Ember thought of a life devoid of warmth, without autumn's colors. Rivers frozen, featureless, still. The world was littered with old constructions. Every invention had fallen to time and neglect. The cloak was only one such relic, but it spoke of the ore's tremendous power. The sulfur vents turned the marsh waters unpleasantly hot, and Rhyme found the new sensation troubling. It made him feel as if he were melting. Ember noticed the falling snow whenever she donned the cloak. The slow white rain drifted in the air, reminding her of falling leaves. A great bridge, shattered by an explosion long ago. Experiments with the ore had not always yielded success. Another tower in the midst of fields. A sorcerer's tower. They were surprised the tower had not collapsed, but magic persists. Together, they began to adjust to the temperature changes. Its lows, its heights. Not equilibrium, but close. Mighty bellows had been shaped beneath the mountain. They wondered what other structures lay beneath their feet. A huge stair rose on the far side of the chamber. If bellows were made, that meant a furnace must be fed, all to consume the ore, to shape the artifacts they used now. In this tower, they both felt the tension coiled in the lower platform. When the heat touched it, it would spring upwards sharply. Rhyme flew through the air, feeling the wind on his skin. Ember's heart sank seeing Rhyme imprisoned in the ice. She worked quickly. Every moment he was buried in the ice was too much for her to bear. What happened to the Sorcerer's Kingdom spoke of fire, then flood. In shaping the ore, they brought ruin in their act of creation. The scarves were all that was left of the absent king in this world. Whatever alliance with the sorcerers had existed, the ore had ended it. Ember and Rhyme had seen what had befallen the kingdom, the castle, and wondered if perhaps what happened here was affecting their twin worlds as well. The collapsed towers of this world made them wonder if the idea of the other's world outshone the reality. If they were to find a way to be together, they would gain much, and lose much as well. They felt a strange, familiar vibration, faint at first. There was ore near, somewhere beneath the earth. The cloaks shimmered in the light, the chains on the hem sparkling. The cloak became heavier, as if drinking in the ore's energy. They came upon what seemed a great windmill, tilting platforms designed to turn in the wind, or the heat and cold. As they studied the tilted platforms, they reflected on the turns their journey had taken. Hot springs boiled up from the depths of the marsh, creating fissures in the road above. The faint smell of sulfur lingered in the air. Ember was grateful she could still breathe in the cloak's embrace, as could Rhyme, even trapped in ice. Despite their differences, at least the air and water were not against them. A dam had been built here, but time had been the water's ally. The locks of the dam were cracked and splintered, the water now flowing freely through the cracks. They marveled at the work these structures must have required, and wondered if that was why the kingdom of the sorcerers and the absent king had been neglected. The submerged chambers took on an odd light in the heat from the vents. So much of this world lay beneath the water, yet the sorcerer's ambitions for the ore seemed to account for much of the ruin, not the marsh. The world below was almost as great as the kingdom above. Two kingdoms of sky and water, meeting, reflecting in the water's surface. Ember noticed the black scarf cast no reflection on the ice's surface, and she shivered. The towers grew larger, grander, and the destruction that had been brought to them more savage. Ember was briefly grateful that Rhyme's ice preserved this world and its ruins against the elements, even if only for a short time. On both the battlements and the rises in the road where only the rains could touch, time made its presence felt. Everything was a marker of the past, not whatever future they had envisioned. The sorcerer's experiments with the ore had left their mark. Entire structures had caved in, their insides exposed to the wind and the water. From below the water, there was a rumble of wood against stone, and the surface of the false lake rippled. Platforms shifted beneath the water, like stairs. The road neared a familiar door, and a familiar presence. dragon was hidden and wished to conceal itself from them. All that was needed was to expose it to the light. The cloak had allowed each to experience the world of the other, and they were stronger for it. A throne room with a single chair. Suits of armor stood watch, the only guards left. Looking from above, the hall seemed even emptier. Light fought to enter the room, now that the candles had died. Great chains and pulleys ran along the galleries and hung from the ceiling, ferrying the ore for the absent king. Despite the castle's emptiness, the presence of the other helped buoy their spirits. Great towers rose above them and the sky opened up, shattered stones leading upward. Atop the tower, a door with a face, eyes closed, inscribed on its surface. Scaffolding encircled a half-finished tower. The kingdom had been neglected before the wilderness creeped in. Obtaining the scarf gave them a view of the mountains beyond the battlements, and for a moment, reminded them of home. This world was torn with fissures and shadows. The cold and warmth of their worlds felt fragile, delicate. They rose together, but had never felt more apart. Rhyme could still make his presence felt, as could Ember, but barely. They could only work in concert from a distance, as if the world was forcing them apart. Rhyme was still able to use the elements to call forth solutions from home, but it fell to Ember to make them work correctly. They could feel the rumbling of platforms and tunnels below, shifting at the lantern's whims. Balancing the lanterns provided a bridge across the chasm below. The scarf in hand, its weight was a reminder of the weight between them. Gathering the scarves no longer brought joy, only an increasing fear between them. Rhyme's chilling effect caused the platforms to invert, and the stair above them became a stair below. Ember's touch had caused the stairs to stretch skyward. She watched Rhyme rise out of sight. The mechanism seemed constructed to divide them. Though divided, they always found their way back to each other. The world clawed at them, the ore in the air swirling, coalescing into chains. The ore had shackled them. The light and frost of their worlds shrank, captured in spheres. The spheres, the hearts of their worlds, dragged behind them, captured by the ore. The statues were memorials, a queen and a king, forever separated. Ember could feel the sphere of her world being pulled from beneath the ground. It wrenched at her, like a piece of her had been torn away. The caves had worked to drive them apart. Now, it seemed to encourage them to cast their worlds away as well. Though they loved their worlds, neither wanted to be shackled to them. It was the first time they thought of their worlds as burdens. This world, it was a hollow one. Whatever had lived here, it was absent now. The scarves seemed more at home here. The fabric seemed to drink in the darkness around it. With no ore in sight, they wondered at the purpose of the machines. The caves felt more like a grave than a mine. It was a long way to fall, Ember thought. She turned her face from Rhyme's ghostly white light, so he would not see her fear. Excavating the ore had only created graves to fill. Mining the world had ended it. The stone blocks had been shaped and carved not only to seal the caves, but to lock it in place. Someone had sculpted their own cage. The gate seemed built to seal the caves, containing whatever lay within. The wooden supports for the stone blocks above looked as if they had been designed to collapse, burying the tunnel. The thin ramps of stone looked precariously balanced, yet held their weight without shifting. The shackles were not a burden. The sphere of their world grounded them and allowed them to fly free. Even with the slope of the caves against them, the scarf was theirs. This scarf seemed as if it could not be seized by one swinging alone. The slope did not lend itself to reaching it, as if the ground was fighting them, keeping them apart. The world grew darker, the shadows longer. Ember could barely see Rhyme's ghostly light, and Rhyme found Ember's bright flame nearly swallowed in darkness. The darkness pressed in as the corridors narrowed, and they were barely able to move. Yet they did not welcome the closeness it imposed on them. Rhyme feared to let Ember fall. His hands braced on her sphere as she flew upwards, leaving her own sphere behind. Light fell on the statue, its head bowed. Its eyes were dead hollows, gouged from stone, blinded to the path ahead. The caves grew more vast, and the distance between them became more pronounced. Cables hinting at what might have once been a bridge tangled lifelessly in the air. Ember thought of the bridge where they first met, and for the first time, wondered if it would have been better had she not stepped foot on it. A circle of wolves, their necks stretched upward, forever howling at the stone sky above. The chill atop the elevator came in the view. The desolation of the world only drove home the isolation. There seemed no end to the tunnel, and no path to follow. The sense of being in a tomb grew, and became a certainty. The arcane work lanterns guarded gates that seemed to lead nowhere, and guard nothing. In all the worlds, the machines were built to mine the ore. But no ore was here, and they began to think there never was. The feeling of these devices constructed from an unsettled mind returned. And they wondered if perhaps they too had begun to develop such obsessions that would also lead nowhere. Capturing the scarves had become almost an obsession. They wondered if the dragon felt the same. The cracks of the sulfur vents were still. Ember recalled how she used to dance on them in the rocks of her home, and how if Rhyme was with her, they would never alight again. More barriers rose to separate them. The remains of what might have been a home seemed out of place here, and it hurt to look at. It was as if someone had thought to live their last moments here. They took the scarf from the rafters and left the remains of the house behind. empty bell tower, sealed off, the bell now gone. It was as if time had vacated the castle, along with its absent king. Another door. On its surface was etched a mountain, with rays of light falling upon it. The scarf seemed a shred of a larger work, and reminded them of the shredded painting in the castle. Another world stretched out before them, more fierce than the castle. Fire and electricity filled the air, almost vibrating, and before them, a fallen meteor consumed their vision. A meteor, and within, the troubling orb, blazing bright, so bright as to be painful. Even the ground shook at the impact when they touched, shattering the rock around them and ahead of them. Still reeling from the change, the two came upon an ancient gatehouse. Rhyme and Ember struggled to know when to give each other space and when to dare contact. A tunnel ran beneath the ground, but a great cap of stone blocked the way downwards. The two kept an uneasy distance, unsure of the new energy between them. Ahead of them, they could see great fissure in the rock, caused by explosions long ago. Meteor impacts? Mining? Both? Many feet had marched through here. Boots, soldiers, marching to war. But against what? An excavation site, hollowed from the rock, to mine ore and then shape it. Into weapons, perhaps. Even as their attempts at connection pushed them apart, it still allowed progress, but the effect was becoming increasingly maddening. Great quarries, ore had been here once, perhaps from meteors long ago, now excavated in great amounts. The supports here looked unsteady and blackened, as if by fire and war. A king's statue stood here in effigy. It was his realm the absent king had come to conquer. As to why he came to conquer, they both felt they knew the answer. The ore. They climbed in silence. Neither seemed eager to wait for the other. At the top, they spied a gatehouse, shelter up the road. But before they could reach it, the sky became lit with fire and light. They took refuge as the stars rained down outside. Yet they feared to stand too close in the narrow structure. Below the gatehouse lay what may have once been a moat. The waters were still, disturbed only by their passage. Maybe someone had hid down here? Air blew in from the crevice above. Great mining platforms were erected here, sagging under their load. Shadows in the water below revealed the hint of armor, weapons. Yet the king seemed oblivious, atop his pedestal in the flooded cavern. They came upon a great bridge, the blade of a statue of an ancient warrior. The blade pointed back the way they came. The warrior's eyes were closed, his head downcast. The starkness of their worlds, one of frost, one of bright fire, never seemed more apparent than on that bridge. They came upon more signs of a fallen kingdom, brought low by fire and war, against an unknown enemy. The graves and fallen stones seemed to taunt them, above the water and below. The ore had been mined and used as a weapon here. The craters in the land, the splintered trees, It was traces of the ore used by human hands. Why had they been allowed to see each other, come so close, only to be driven apart? Was it the cruelty of this world, or something in themselves? With few answers, only suspicion, they kept the other at a distance as they left the cave. The gravestones seemed to stare at them, each marking a way forward, or an ending. Parts of the complex seemed to activate old gates and sluices from a safe distance. Gates and platforms being controlled by chains across the cave for safety's sake. A great bridge rising upwards. Had the absent king been trying to reach the sky? Was this a world that had fallen like theirs? When sky and earth met, and one tried to conquer another? At the thought of home, they began to suspect the other might have caused the change, the decay of their world they had felt on awakening. The rock had melted, carved into new shapes with the flow, the wreckage of machines around it. When had this happened? She wondered if the path was worth it. Perhaps these scarves were warnings, not keys to other worlds. As if enraged, heat broke through the surface of the earth. The familiar smell of sulfur was carried on the air, cooled at Rhyme's contact. Fire is rage, and so is cold. One burns the skin, the other cuts the bone. Their anger reached new heights, and seemed only to remind them how much farther they could fall. The king watched silently, judging them perhaps, as if their journey was a familiar tale and knew how it would end, marked by silence and stone. Ember could feel the heat building beneath the ground, and wondered if this was what had torn the world apart. Holes had been blasted through the cave. In rage, they now knew. To destroy the mines, destroy the ore, perhaps. But the source of the rage, they did not know. The mining efforts had not reached here. The faint traces of ore in the rocks shrieked at them, The vibration menaced them. Conflict had made its home in this world, and they did not like it. They both wished to leave it behind. It seemed they could only succeed by The half-finished works about the castle were all around them. The absent king had forsaken the castle long before the elements had claimed it. They came to a strange chamber. The ore was being bled into crystal vials, meant for two. Perhaps the king had thought to use the ore to bring them together. Perhaps they had been of two worlds as well. All went dark as the barrier between them dissipated. The new world before them seemed blurred, as if they were seeing variations of not just the castle, but all the worlds it held. They were powerless, but at last able to touch. Rain fell on them from an uncaring sky. Where once it would have froze on Rhine or evaporated on Ember, it now drenched them and caused a strange chill in their bones. Everything seemed slowed, muted. The cave ahead was lit with the ghostly light they had seen in the absent king's tomb. It pierced the darkness here, as if shining from some distant star, or from another world. There was no ore here, only a shadow of mines of other worlds. It spoke of loneliness and madness. Only a lone ore cart remained. In the distance, steam clouds formed from swirling heat and ice, drifted over the land like mist. Shattered scaffolding, warped beams. This world was not simply crushed together. It was twisted as well, as if by some great fist. And ahead, to their surprise, they saw a glimmer of Ember's world, as if a slice of it had cut into this world. There were no scarves here, they noticed. Only the two they had lost, and their power along with it. The tangle of roots and twigs that Rhyme had once been able to cover in frost lay here, unaffected by his presence. They came to another effigy, growing from the forest floor. A queen, with branches wrapped about her like dragon's wings. The figure was transformative, as if she was melting into the wood. The ore in the cart had captured a part of Ember's world and was bleeding it into the air. Evoking the sulfur jets of Ember's world gave them hope and lifted their spirits for a time. They were together, but if this was the result, would that mean leaving their worlds behind for this one? The swords were melded with the runic markers, just as the wheels melded with the trees. Two objects meant to be apart, melting into one. The silence between them was more evident in the cave. It spoke of doubt, fear, having one's hopes granted without realizing the consequence. Timing the cart's movements and aligning it just right, it took effort and patience. They reached the surface, but the sky was still ominous, unwelcome. The breath of Rhyme's world, however temporary, provided a means of escape. Relief filled them. Then they turned away, embarrassed. Ice lakes dotted the region, the ice sealing in caves and tunnels below. The water looked trapped, paralyzed in ice. Rhyme and Ember felt the same. The ore cart beneath glowed with ore, flush with the energy of Ember's world, but it could not express itself within the cold. Rhyme felt as if he had the same effect on Ember. They descended into a cave of glittering ice. Rhyme recalled his home. He had missed its beauty, but it was almost colder than he remembered. Too cold. Ember became alarmed. The idea of her home as an obstacle. It was new to her. Perhaps this is how Rhyme felt, she thought. Ember's world pushed at them from the stone, the jet flames fighting their progress. They braved the flames and finally reached the top, where more great mechanisms awaited, a furnace in the middle. They persevered, the flickering of Ember's world providing a way forward. A flame-blasted tunnel lay before them, the rocks scorched by the heat. Again, the two thought of the dragon. She was ahead. They were certain of it. They reached a splintered black plain, crossed by slivers of heat and ice. The glimpses of their worlds no longer held joy. It only reminded them that they had come together and lost everything. The dragon lay ahead. They could feel her presence. Cold, still, regal. The flames were like steps, fueled by the ore. Then, like that, almost defying reason, they came upon a house. Beyond it, the dragon waited in silence, almost inviting. A home, a life together they had sought, yet now frightening. They entered the house, and the door slammed shut behind them. They felt small in the house, like playthings trapped for the dragon's amusement. It seemed the dragon sought to grant their wish of being together. But it was an unnatural gift, as twisted and cursed as the world around them. They would be kept here by the dragon, their wish forever granted. It would be their choice, remain within, or find a way through, past the dragon's maw. It might have once been her home, before a mad king had shattered the walls between them, and changed her and her world irrevocably. The ore had left its mark, turning skin to scale, scale into wings. The worlds would right themselves. Ember and Rhyme's worlds would be made whole, no longer shadowed by the dragon or the ore. But what of the two of them? 3 doors lay before them. One to Ember's world, one to Rhyme's. In each, they would be restored. The last door led back to the castle, where neither Rhyme's ice nor Ember's warmth would touch. But they would be together in a balanced world, much like this one. The choice was theirs, or a choice made by one, alone. They would never again dance in flames and light, nor see the reflections in ice, or feel the snow on their skin. Yet imagination painted a new castle, with 2 thrones where one once sat. Perhaps not as bright as a world of fire, nor as beautiful as a sculpture of ice, but something more human, and not at all empty, strengthened by a bond that could not be separated.